Broadcasting from Detroit's Cass Corridor, it's the Metro on WDET. I'm Kerry Jr. II.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Today, we start where the city once broke itself in half with I-75. For decades, that highway carved deep wounds through black neighborhoods. Now, Detroit wants to heal those scars. We'll hear about a plan to cap the freeway and reconnect what was lost.
Then the rhythm of the road shifts south to the neighborhoods where semis rumble past schools and homes. Southwest Detroit's been shouting about trucks for years. Now the city's listening. But is it enough?
We'll also explore a different kind of infrastructure, the green kind. Michigan's cannabis market could soon be footing the bill for the state's roads. Lawmakers call it smart budgeting. Critics call it a burden on small Black-owned businesses still chasing the promise of equity.
And the sound of money, melody, and memory. How Michigan's pension funds are investing in song royalties. And what that means when Wall Street hums along to your favorite tune.
We begin where Detroit's story often runs fastest, along its highways. In Metro Detroit, we're accustomed to highways. They're everywhere around these parts, and they get us to where we're going pretty quickly. But they also have drawbacks. They create noise and air pollution and keep potential businesses and neighbors further from each other. A Detroit-based organization and the state are working to change that. The project to cap I-75 could allow pedestrians to stroll between downtown Detroit and certain parts of the city. So what's included in the plan? To discuss that now and last week's public meeting of capping I-75, we have Eric Larson with us. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Downtown Detroit Partnership. Eric, welcome back to the Metro.
Oh, great to be with you, and thank you for taking time to talk about this topic. It's an important one. We've been divided way too long.
I think a lot of our listeners are interested in some unification. So the Downtown Detroit Partnership, alongside the State Transportation Department, are planning, again, to cap parts of I-75. I'm wondering first, where did this idea come from, and why did some people want to do it in the first place?
Well, it's really interesting because, for the Downtown Detroit Partnership, we think any of these projects most importantly start with community input, community vision, and really a response to the community's wants and needs. And that's been very much what the I-75 cap feasibility study has been and how it started. In many ways, it came out of the community benefits efforts for the district Detroit. So, the sports and entertainment district just to the north of our core downtown. And, the community benefits process had over 200 community meetings, lots of different conversations, and a good amount of the input on what was important to the residents and businesses in that neighborhood. And one of the key aspects that was identified and quite frankly was lifted up as one of the most interesting and important aspects of change in that community was the ability to reconnect the community both north and south of I-75. I-75, through the Highways Act back in the 50s and 60s, really created a moat and dissected through the center of our town, and this was an opportunity and a vision that came out of those efforts to reunite both sides of I-75 and the communities on both sides of the freeway.
So
go ahead.
Forgive me for jumping in, Eric, but I want to get to the proposed locations if we could, because it sounds like those locations then stem from community desire. And the locations are around Woodward, Grand River, and between John R. and Brush Street. So that's why those locations were decided for capping. Is that right? Because that is what you were hearing most strongly from the community.
That's correct. And there's a couple different ways you can go about it. One is you can do a very long contiguous cap. We've seen that in, for instance, Boston's Big Dig or Clyde Warren, where there is a very long capping of the freeway. What we have come up with is a series of caps, and it's directly responsive to the community's input and the community's activities on both sides of I-75 and how we can best connect, especially from a much more sort of friendly form of mobility. Your introduction also talked about the environmental impacts, both sound and noise and pollution. This is another way to calm the environment and create a much more inviting and, quite frankly, healthy environment as well. And the benefit of doing these 3 caps as opposed to 1 is, clearly there's a cost consideration as we finalize the feasibility study, but there also is an opportunity to really spread the benefit and the impact, the positive impact in more places by doing this. And so between the engineering and the community input, those are the 3 locations that we've landed. We now are moving forward. We had a grant from the Kresge Foundation last year that allowed us to do 3 additional community outreach meetings and get some additional input, not just in the locations, but also how those caps could be potentially designed and activated. And now, fast forward, moving into the end of this year and into early 26, we have received a planning grant from the federal government. It's a $2 million planning grant, and that will allow us to continue this community engagement and also engage consultants that can move the design and engineering forward so that we are in a place when construction dollars are identified to move the project forward.
Let's help listeners to visualize this project. What's being proposed to go on top of the caps in each of these spaces?
So each cap has a little bit different configuration and a different size, but as you move, if you look at the Grand River, for instance, section of I-75 and the capping, that would be a little bit smaller, very community-focused park. It also could relate to some of the higher ed activity that's coming out of the University of Michigan Center for Innovation and the innovation corridor that Grand River now represents. And so different ways to think about the programming, but it's soft space, it's community space, it's think about parks and public space with different designs and activities and programming. Then the center cap at Woodward, which is really our main street and connects a lot of the sports and entertainment activity, would more likely be a little bit larger. It would allow for a greater congregation of the public. It could have walking paths and various public activities. It also could potentially have small structure on it that would allow for food and beverage, and most importantly, hygiene relief stations and so forth, that is really responsive to those that would be utilizing the park and are in the neighborhood. And then obviously to the east side at Brush, it would again be a little bit smaller cap, connecting what is Brush Park and the very significant residential development that is taking place to the north of the core of our downtown, as well as, again, some of the sports and entertainment activity. So it's an extension of the green space and the public spaces that have been a priority for the city. All 300 of our parks throughout the city have received some level of investment, and this is allowing for us to build on that concept.
Okay, so community space is going to be prioritized. And what is going to stop these caps from turning into areas that are more retail-based?
Yeah, these would still be very much public property and public parks and public spaces. They would be in coordination with the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan through MDOT. And so there isn't a focus on commercializing these spaces. It really is intended to be equitable and open and very accessible. The Downtown Detroit Partnership has a long history of being an extension of the city's, not only mission but obligation to the public and to the community and the residents of Detroit. The 18 public spaces that we currently manage and operate are all city-owned spaces. And so we first lead with the understanding that these are public assets and they have to be accessible and responsive to the public and to the residents. There's a lot of opportunity to really create and build upon that network, and these caps represent that.
So then we're not going to see these caps turn into commercial corridors with lots of shops and restaurants that sometimes can feel inaccessible in comparison to public spaces, to parks where people feel like they can commune together in those so-called third spaces.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And one of the things, just from an engineering standpoint, structurally, it's a little bit more difficult to get any kind of real massing of building typology on these caps just because they're sitting above an expressway. Obviously, there's a lot of infrastructure that tends to be sort of below grade, and that doesn't, work as well on these caps. It doesn't preclude us, as I said, from having, some very important food and beverage and for instance, restroom facilities that service not only those that are coming and enjoying the public spaces, but also provide potentially some earned revenue that would go back into those public spaces because they need to be maintained and they need to have a revenue source to maintain and program those. But the intent is absolutely not to commercialize these public spaces. They are to continue to support and be part of the very significant infrastructure of public spaces we have throughout the city. So I think about the success of the Joe Louis Greenway and the success of the obviously the public spaces we operate in the downtown, but then the Parks Coalition that is really bringing together the parks throughout the city. All of us are focused on making sure they are community first and programmed in that way.
Yeah, because community spaces can really define and enrich a city and give it a kind of character and a kind of feeling that you can't replicate, that you can't get certainly when you're seeing a bunch of commercial corridors. Of course, though, there are infrastructure projects in the U.S. that sometimes eat up way too much money and they take way too much time. Earlier, you mentioned the Big Dig project in Boston, and that's actually an infamous one in that way. That's a highway tunnel construction project that took 16 years to build and exceeded $20 billion. How does your organization and the state prevent this project from taking a decade and becoming much more expensive than anticipated?
Yeah, I think that's why the next phase of our feasibility study, again, that's been supported from the federal government, is so important because not only are we continuing to receive community input as to what the expectations and wants and needs are, but also we are looking at what is the operational cost, what are the construction costs. We're going to be finalizing a lot of the engineering and design that allows us to get much closer on the not only the construction costs, but also what does it look like to operate and to maintain these spaces. We aren't in a position today where there is the kind of both federal support, which often is contributing to these types of projects, as well as the state support to do something like a Big Dig. But we have a very unique opportunity to be very thoughtful and disciplined with the public funds and create these wonderful, smaller, they're still significant in terms of what they can house, but smaller interventions along a very important stretch of 375 that has been disconnected. So I feel fairly confident that, one, because of budget constraints, and two, because of the focus of our community engagement and the teams that are working on this, both at the city and at MDOT and with the Downtown Detroit Partnership, we are keeping both the realistic opportunity and of funding in mind, as well as thinking about what is the best way to maximize the investment that is being made in these caps. And part of, again, what the next second series of community meetings will be doing is finalizing that design so that we are ready to make a case to the federal government for funding. But it will be very, very thoughtful and very deliberate.
Eric, I heard you mention the I-75 project. The Downtown Detroit Partnership came out with a statement supporting the Michigan Department of Transportation's decision to pause the project, which would have replaced the highway with a road. As briefly as you can, what went wrong with that project?
Oh, I think that's a very good example of where the process started before the community had an opportunity to really provide the input that was so necessary to get it right. And the project was not right. The community was expressing the concerns in many different ways and in many different forums. Some of it was business, some of it was resident concerns, and we felt that it was necessary. And MDOT, I again credit them for seeing the concerns and hearing the concerns and pausing long enough to reassess. I think what will happen is we will come with a revised plan. No plan is ever perfect, but I do think there will be a revised plan that still addresses some of the harms of the past with 375, but does it in a way that, both during construction, which is very impactful, as well as long term for the next 70 years, provides something that is much more in tune with what the community's vision and, quite frankly, addresses many of the community's concerns.
So is it fair to say then one of the lessons that you can take moving forward from that project that's going to help to inform the I-75 capping project is how vital community input is to this work?
I don't think you can underscore or underestimate the importance of starting with community. And that doesn't really matter with any public project, much less, a number of the larger scale, private projects. It is ultimately the community that is most impacted and the community that should have, the greatest voice. And I do think that's what we're seeing, not only in our work at the Downtown Detroit Partnership, but I really do appreciate the way the city and MDOT have recognized the need in these projects, especially these that have been, so impactful in the past, but also have the opportunity to repeat some of those past, challenges as we move forward. And so absolutely cannot agree more that starting with community input and understanding everyone's perspective and trying to find the common ground is a great place to start.
Finally, Eric, the Downtown Detroit Partnership expects to start construction in 2028. In the last 20 seconds that we have here, do you think you'll meet that timeline?
I hope so. Again, the final construction funding will be dependent on, budget opportunities and funding opportunities at the federal level as well as with MDOT. But there is a tremendous amount of support for these. The impact, both social and economic, is real, and we are hopeful that with the feasibility study, we'll be able to make a very compelling case that really responds to the community, and people will appreciate that, and the public funding will be available.
Eric Larson is the CEO of the Downtown Detroit Partnership. Eric, thanks so much for joining me on the Metro.
Thank you.
Metro on WDET. Last week, we spoke with Detroit's Chief of Infrastructure about why the city is increasing enforcement of truck routes in Southwest Detroit. Coming up, a community group says that's not enough. They want a citywide ordinance for truck traffic. We'll hear more about that next here on the Metro. Stay with us.